most of our apps have to deal with some very basic things like loading data, logging the user, and stuff like that. So you can imagine that we take the majority of the time that the user will define if the user is going to continue with our app or not for the user nonsense actions. So what can we do to make that a little more enjoyable? Well, we can add motion. And motion can be integrated throughout the whole application. And if it's done right, then the user doesn't really understand what makes your app so much enjoyable and more natural to use than any other applications that they had before, like when they're downloading a file. We are going to have a short overview on why do we actually need the animation. Hello everyone, how's your day so far? All good? Woohoo, nice to hear. So a very quick question before we begin. How many of you have been on Android for more than 10 years or about 10 years? Okay, all right. And how many of you have been using views before switching to Compose? Amazing. So you know the pain about animations. Because when I started, it was many years ago. I've been working on Android for almost 13 years now. So when I started with animations, I basically didn't know what I was signing for. So I was working in an agency back then, and the client's designer became really creative. So they brought us this very shiny UI, all full of animations, and I was the youngest and like the most junior one. So when everyone had to pick their tickets, they were like, okay, so who's picking up the animations? Me not knowing what that entailed, they were like, oh, Eliza, do you want the animations? So I'm like, ah, okay, sure. Little did I know, obviously no one else volunteered, and I ended up doing that UI. And I was going mental for like 5 hours a week, 8 hours a day, for almost 2 months. But yeah, who's counting, right? So the problem though with that was that after I got to that UI, I was also the only one that got that much depth into the animations. And obviously, every time that we had another app and another creative designer, guess who had to do those animations? Yep, me. And I was very happy with that at the end of the day because then I was the only one working on them and I figured out how to do a lot of those things. Eventually, kind of easy. And then Compose came to our way, and I was like, okay, this is amazing, because now I don't have to spend 8 hours a day just to move a freaking button. And every time that you wanted to do that with the views, it was dead obvious that animations were just an afterthought that was built into Android. And every time that you want to move a single pixel, it knew how to make your life miserable. So for today, if you want the slides, by the way, you can scan the QR. I'll show it at the end of the talk as well. We are going to have a short overview on why do we actually need the animations. We are going to see some high-level APIs, low-level APIs, animations for navigation and lists, and finally a little more animated things like the vectors, After Effects, and stuff like that. Hopefully, we will have some time for questions as well. So there are many studies in the mobile world that conclude into one thing. Basically, the user will make up their mind within 30 seconds if they will start using your app, if they're going to give already apps that they're using already for your app, if they like it or not, basically. And as you can see, those 30 seconds are not really that much. And within those 30 seconds, most of our apps have to deal with some very basic things like loading data, logging the user, and stuff like that. So you can imagine that we take the majority of the time that the user will define if the user is going to continue with our app or not, with for the user nonsense actions. So what can we do to make that a little more enjoyable? Well, we can add motion. And motion can be integrated throughout the whole application. And if it's done right, then the user doesn't really understand what makes your app so much enjoyable and more natural to use than any other applications that they had before, possibly. Um, we can also use motion to show to the user for some blocking actions and then make their user story a little more enjoyable, like when they're downloading a file. So when we're adding motion, there are only two rules. First of all, it has to be meaningful. And second of all, it can't be blocking the user. So let's say that you had like the button before, sorry about that. You can't stop. If you already placed the order, you have to stop the animation. You can't just keep running the animation till the animation runs and then move your user to the new screen. So if the animation is short, then okay, you replay that. But if not, then the user action comes first. So back to where I was. Yes, in some scenarios, motion are nice to have, like the animations that we saw at the very beginning. But in some others, like when you press a button, it's a must-have. Because just imagine having a button that has no tap indicator or ripples. And then the user has actually no clue if you've already registered their click listener or not. So let's talk about the animation APIs. And we are going to see four categories. The first category is about modifiers and composables. And those are the APIs that come in the form of a modifier or a composable. We're going to see three different of them. The first one allows us to animate the appearance and disappearance of any component. The second one allows us to automatically animate size changes. And finally, for the third one, we have, this is for animating content change. And we have two APIs for this one. We're going to see, first of all, the animated visibility, that we can see that it's a composable. So to animate the visibility of any composable, all we need to do is basically encapsulate within the animated visibility composable that it comes with the system. And just like that, then we don't really have to do anything else. Ta-da, it's animated. So by default, the content appears by fading in and expanding, and then disappears by fading out and shrinking, as you can see over here. But there are a number of built-in transitions, either enter or exit, that you can actually use to modify those without having to dive deeper into the other, like, lower-level APIs. So we can customize the transition over here by just specifying the enter and the exit transitions that we want. And we can also, so we see over here like how different it now really is. And we can also combine them with just a plus sign. So now it also going, so the first one that you're going to see is without the fade in, the fade out. And then we can see over here how it is with the fade in and the fade out, and how we can very easily customize it with just a single line, basically. So one of the most powerful tools that you have when it comes to animations is the Animation Studio preview. So if the animation is described within the preview of the composable, then this window appears, and then you can run the animation over there. You can stop it, you can replay, you can make it run to the moment, to the keyframe that you're actually interested in. You can slow it down, you can do whatever you want with that. This helps a lot, obviously, with debugging any animations, especially when you have like the fading in, the fading out, or keyframes, and you want very specifically to say like which keyframes should do what. So let's move on now. Since we are already at the composables, we are going to see the animated content and the crossfade one. So for the animated content, it changes based on a target change, a target state, sorry. So for this one, oh, I have the crossfade, okay. So for the crossfade, we basically change between different screens. So we said that there are two over here, animated content and crossfade. Animated content changes before different states, crossfade changes between different composables. So if we go back to our code over here, we can see over here that we have a target state, and that is a different composable that it's going to show up every time that our state changes. And that looks like this, and we will see that both of them are very similar. So the animated content is also a composable. We again say what the target state is, and based on the state, it changes within the same component. So that looks like this. So you can see over here that they are very, very similar when it comes to visually. But again, crossfade is for animating between different composables, while the animated content is for animating differences of the content within the very same composable based on the target state. So finally, we have a modifier, the animated content size. So let's see how the modifiers work. Well, just as every other modifier. So you still have the normal modifiers that you would normally use, and then you add at the end the animate content size. And we also say here, for instance, that if that is the year, then we just expand that. Otherwise, we don't. And again, very easily just animates that for you without you having to take care of really anything else. So, moving to the value chains for state. So for the value chains, we are not going to stay just to the high-level APIs. We're going to dive a little deeper to the lower-level APIs. So the lower-level APIs are basically the APIs on which all of the high-level APIs are based on. And if you're already familiar to some of the views, then those low-level APIs are basically the animatable. So we are going to see two APIs over here. The first one is for animating single values, and the second one is for animating multiple values. All right, let's see the animate as state, which is for animating single values first. So there are a few options available, as you can see over here, out of the box for the animate as state, like float, color, DP, and more than that. There is also the animate value as state, and there you can just provide with any converter your value, whatever value that is, and then convert it to the animatable content that you have over there. So we'll first start like this without any animations, and it's going to look very ugly, I agree. So let's see how we can make that a little better. And what we're going to do is we're going to add the animate color as state. We can see over here that we set a target value. And then we also have like two colors, right? The initial value that we have, and then the target value that we want to animate to. Now, what you also need to see over here is that we don't really take care of any interruptions. So if any interruption happen while the animation is running, those are the high-level APIs, by the way. If any interruption happens while the animation is running, then we can see over here that the system itself takes care of that. So if, let's say, we start from like a value X and we want to go to Z, and in the middle we have to change those values, then it will start not from the X, but it will start from the last value that it had before the interruption, and it will continue the animation with the same value and the same velocity that it had through the till the new target value that we have over there. Cool. So this looks like this, which might be like slightly better, but just slightly better. No one wanna see that, right? So let's see what we can do better on that. So as we have the enter and the exit transitions that we saw before, we also have a lot of specs for the rest of the animations. And we're going to see them throughout all, basically, the new APIs. So here we see the twin animation, and it looks kind of better. And we can see over here that you can, again, as we saw before with the transitions, you can combine as many of those as you want. And every single one of those objects, the animate as state object, is going to run independently. That means that basically every single one of them is changing just one value at that composable, and you cannot orchestrate them. You can have as many as you want, but you cannot orchestrate them to run, for instance, like after each other and stuff like that. So the animation specs that we saw before, we have twin, we have spring, we have keyframes, we have repeatable, we have the infinite repeatable, and finally we have the snap, especially like for at least the snap on the specific item. Now it's time to dive a little deeper, and as we will go to the transitions, we're also going to go to some lower level APIs, as we said before. So, yeah, please. Okay, cool. So we have the exact code as we saw before, and now let's see how we can alter that to something that is using the lower level APIs. Now, the reason why you may need or may want to go into a lower level API is because it's basically providing you more options than what the higher level APIs are providing, right? So let's see an example over here. So we create that animatable, as we said, and then we have that animate too. Now you see over here that you can have a different, initial value. So over here we have the blue, and then we have two other values that is gonna animate from and to. This is not something that we could have before with the animate as state. Like in animate as state, as it says, higher level API, we were only able to have two states. So if you want something a little more extra, then you need again to go to the lower level APIs. Now, all of the animate as functions, those are suspendable functions. And that means that we need to wrap them inside the launched effect as it is over here. What does that mean, though, is that we can actually have them outside of our composable as well. They don't need to be inside the composable. And this is also another difference between the higher level APIs and the lower level APIs. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that because that's a lower level API, you will need to take care of any interruptions yourself. That is not something that comes out of the system with the lower level APIs, unfortunately. Okay, and we can see here it's exactly the very same result that we saw before. I think that the blue didn't quite show up, but yeah, it used to be there. So for the transitions now, the transitions, as we said before, is for animating multiple values. So we can see over here that we have the updateTransition object, and that has a target state. And then we have a different color for every target state that we want. So then again, we just have the transition and the animate color functions that we can set the state to whatever we want. And we can see over here that the target state is just Boolean, but it can basically be an enum as well. It can be whatever you want. It doesn't really have to be just a Boolean or a flag or whatever. So for This one, for instance, if it's loaded, if it's loading, if you tap on it, you can have a different animation state for whatever your UI state is. Cool. And we can see over here that again we can customize this fully as with the the transition specs that we saw before. Sorry, the animation specs that we saw before. Um, and the transition doesn't only come with the color extension function, it comes with multiple. So you do have like float, DPs, int, and stuff like that. And again, we have the animate value at the very bottom that you can see over there that you can provide, again, your converter to map to any value that you want. Let's go back a bit. Maybe? Come on. Okay. For the infinite transition. So the infinite transition is a very neat feature that you may need. The best scenario for that is for loading screens. So one of the things with the transitions is that you can actually start running them when you enter the composition, and then because they are like suspend functions, then you can stop them or you can remove the object whenever you want, instead of just having target states as we saw with the animate as state APIs. So one of the examples for the infinite transition would be a loading screen like over here. So the moment that it enters the transition, the composition, it already has started for us, and then we just need to remove it. It's just as easy as it is with the normal transitions. So instead of they having to say like remember transition, we say remember infinite transition. And then we can animate as float over here instead of the color that we had before. And again, we have two target values, the initial value and the target value. And what a surprise. Again, animation specs come to save us, and we can have as many or less as we want. Over here, I can show you an example of the keyframes. So keyframes are specific values that you can set in a specific time frame that you want to specify. So you say over here the duration in millis, how long it's going to run for, and what are going to be the values that it's going to animate from and to. Cool. So that was with the very basic animation APIs that we have in Compose. But we do have so many other scenarios that we want to add animations to. We have lists, we have navigation, we have more creative things like the buttons that morph and stuff like that. So what do we do with those? Well, thankfully, Compose does have that covered as well. Kind of recently, but yes. So let's first see with the animation the list. So this is an example without any navigation animations. This is how it shows up, just like this. So if we want to have animations within the navigation, there are two ways that we can do that, basically. So the first one is within the nav host, we are going to have the enter and the exit transitions. So now over here, you can see that whatever composable is within that nav host is going to have those navigations. So it's going to use the custom slide in, the custom slide out for the exit. Now, if we only want for a very specific composable to have like a different one, then what we need to do is that we just move it from the nav host to the screen itself. And there are also more, like the pop enter and the pop exit transitions. And I think that there are like a couple more that you can customize over there. And if you want, you can still have, oh, no? No, okay. You can still have both the nav host transitions and the screen specific transitions. And if you actually have both, then that means that then the custom transitions that are within the composable are going to take priority over the ones of the nav host. So over here, if our screen loading had that custom slide in, slide out, and the nav host had just the slide in and slide out that comes from Compose. That means that the screen landing would be using the custom ones, and all of the rest of the screens would be using the Compose slide in and slide out. So those would override the nav host animations. So yeah, there are, again, a number of transitions that we can use. For every enter transition, there is the equivalent of the exit transition. And finally, we can see over here how it is with the navigation animations, and how more meaningful it is for the user to see where that comes from. Cool. So let's see for the list animations now. So we can see over here that it's very difficult without having any list animations for the user to understand which item they added, which one they deleted, which one they, like if it got like filtered and what's happening over here. So now let's see what happens with the list animation. So with the list animation, it's very easy for the user to understand visually what they deleted or what they added. So list animations, they are a modifier. So all we need to do is just animate item placement, and that will animate additions, removals, but also any reordering that is happening within the list. And that was basically all. Again, for the animation spec, if you want to add animation spec and modify it a bit, you are more than welcome. And you can combine, again, as many animation specs as you want. So for animating vectors and compose, we have three different ways. The first one is the image vector composable. The second one is the animated vector drawable. And the third one is third-party libraries, like Lottie, for instance, from, I think it's Airbnb. We are not going to see the image vector composables right now. But there is an incredible article from one of the DevRels from Google. Her name is Rebecca Frank. So if you Google like image vectors, Rebecca Frank, you will be able to find her, her article, and it basically covers everything that you will ever need. So what we are going to see over here is the animated vector resource. And to use that, we basically first have to load it up, as we do over here with the function that is provided to us from the system. And then we need to remember the animation. And we need to, oops. We over here have the state that it's changing. So over here is just like a false and a true. So it's just like a Boolean that is switching between those two. And then the result is something like this. So as you can see over here, basically you just get your animated vector drawable, you load it, and that's it. Cool. So for something like a little more complex, we have, like as I mentioned before, third-party libraries. My favorite one is by far Lottie. So over here, what you see is basically an After Effects file. And what you do is you load it with the providers that Lottie is giving you, the library itself, and then you can customize it as you wish. So over here, we see how we can import it into our code, and then we just run it like that. Now, if we want something a little more extra, or we need to get a track of the progress ourselves, then this is how we do that. One of my favorite things I also love to do is that they have dynamic properties. So let's say that you want to change like the color, for instance, of some of the drawables that you have over there. Not drawables? SVGs? Yes, SVGs that you have over there. Then you can specify for that specific SVG what will be the color or the dynamic property for that state that you wanted. Cool. And I know that this was a little too much, and it was just an overview, but what you basically managed to do, what we managed to do so far, is that we can now read this. So when you open the animation, the documentation for the animation APIs in Compose, this is what you are getting welcome to. And it's a very, very nice diagram if you know what you're doing and if you know what each of those APIs is doing. It can guide you through most of the scenarios that you need. If something is not there, then you can always just file for a new feature or find another third-party library that you can use over here. And with that, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I think I should have some time. Yeah? Yeah, cool. Thank you.